And in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Alex Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because of this government's incompetent management of the NHS, 256,000 patients were forced to wait in the back of ambulances as accident and emergency departments couldn't admit them. Why does the Prime Minister think the best way to deal with this is to fine hospitals £90 million for his government's failure?
Well, what this government is doing is putting £12.7 billion extra into the NHS, money that would be cut by the party opposite. And because of that extra money and because of the reforms, waiting times are down, waiting times for inpatients, outpatients are both down, hospital-acquired infections are right down, mixed-sex wards have almost been abolished in our NHS. That's a record we can be proud of.
Mr. Graham Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No, he isn't, and don't call him Shirley.
On our future in Europe, can he confirm the Conservative Party's commitment to renegotiation and a referendum? And has he any extra...
On behalf of the whole House, can I welcome my honourable friend back to the House of Commons, and good to see him making such a strong recovery and being in such strong voice today as well, Mr. Speaker. He makes a very important point. On this side of the House, when in this party, we are committed to a renegotiation and an in-out referendum before the end of 2017, but there has been a staggering silence from the party opposite. Apparently, half of the shadow cabinet support a referendum and the other half don't. Well, they will have their chance on the 5th of July. They can turn up and vote for a referendum in the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, on Syria, the Prime Minister has our support to use the G8 in the coming week to push all members to provide humanitarian assistance to alleviate the terrible crisis that is happening there. But on the arms embargo and supplying weapons to the rebels, he said last week, and I quote, "If we help to tip the balance in that way, there is a greater chance of political transition succeeding." Given that Russia seems ready to supply more weapons to Syria, does the Prime Minister think it is in any sense realistic for a strategy of tipping the balance to work?
Well, first of all, can I thank him for raising this issue and say that he's absolutely right. We should use the G8 to try and bring pressure on all sides to bring about what we all want in this House, which is a peace conference, a peace process, and the move towards a transitional government in Syria. And I'm delighted to tell the House that President Putin will be coming in advance of the G8 for meetings in Downing Street on Sunday when we can discuss this. Look, I do think it's important because we have recognised that the Syrian national opposition are legitimate spokespeople for the Syrian people. I think it's important that we help them, we give them technical assistance, we give them training, we give them advice and assistance. All of those things we're doing, and I think, yes, that does help tip the balance to make sure that President Assad can see he cannot win this by military means alone, and he should be at the negotiations should take place for a transitional government.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, but my question was specifically on the lifting of the arms embargo and the supply of weapons to the Syrian rebels. Now, last week he also told this House, and I quote, "There are clear safeguards to ensure that any such equipment would only be supplied for the protection of civilians." Can he tell us what safeguards those are and how in Syria they would be enforced?
Well, first of all, let me try and say again about the arms embargo. The point about lifting the arms embargo, which applied originally to both the regime and the official Syrian opposition, is to send a very clear message about our intentions and about our views to President Assad. But we have not made a decision to supply the Syrian opposition with weapons. As I said, we are giving them assistance, we are giving them advice, and we are giving them technical help. And we have systems in place, to answer his second question, to make sure that that sort of non-lethal equipment, like transport and things like that, doesn't get into the wrong hands. Of course we do.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, look, two things. Look, first of all, I think we all support the idea that we should focus on the peace conference and making the peace conference Geneva 2 happen. But the problem is that the government has put its energy into the lifting of the arms embargo, not into the peace conference. And secondly, I quoted his words not about non-lethal equipment, but about the supply of lethal equipment. Now, he gave an assurance to this House that in the circumstances of supplying lethal equipment, there would be end-use safeguards. And my question to him is, what would those safeguards be? And I didn't hear an answer. Maybe when he gets up, he can tell us that. And will he also, when he replies, confirm that if he takes a decision to arm the rebels in Syria, there will be a vote of this House on a substantive motion in government time with a recall of Parliament from recess if necessary?
First of all, on this issue of the peace conference, as I said, we all want to see a peace conference come about. The question is, how are we most likely to put pressure on the parties to attend that peace conference? And I have to say, going back to the very first thing he said about the Russian decision to arm the regime, the Russian regime has been arming this regime for decades, and frankly it is naive to believe anything else. That, I think, is important. On the issue of safeguards, we are not supplying the opposition with weapons. We are supplying them with technical assistance and non-lethal equipment. We've made no decision to supply the opposition with weapons. So that is the answer to that issue. On the issue of this House of Commons, as the Foreign Secretary made clear, as I have made clear, I've always believed in allowing the House of Commons a say on all of these issues. I think that was right when it came to Iraq, it was right when we made the decision to help the opposition in Libya, and it would be right in the future as well for that to happen. But let me just stress again, we have made no decision to arm the rebels in Syria.
Sir Nick Harvey.
Mr. Speaker, on the government plan to double the size of our reserve forces, has the Prime Minister considered the role retired Gurkhas might play in this? Now they're allowed to settle here, many Gurkhas have said to me they would welcome an ongoing connection with the British Army, but there's no real routine or tradition of recruiting them. I don't think there's any impediment, but it won't happen by magic. Will he authorise an initiative to recruit them?
I think my honourable friend makes an excellent suggestion. One of the ways I think we can best build up this larger reserve that we want to see, fully funded and fully equipped at 30,000, is to make sure those who've served in the regular army, that we have better opportunities for them to serve in the reserves. And the points he makes about the Gurkhas, I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, will look at that and see what can be done.
McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if the Prime Minister watched Panorama's programme on Monday night, but I'm sure he will be aware of the subject of blacklisting. The programme confirmed what many of us, particularly members of the Scots Faith Select Committee, already knew, that thousands of people in this country have been subjected to blacklisting. It's been compared to McCarthyism. I think it's worse than that. It's secretive, it's behind closed doors. Many people who are on a blacklist don't even know that they are on the blacklist. Can I ask the Prime Minister to call for an urgent inquiry into this practice, which I refer to not as McCarthyism, but as McAlpinism?
Well, to answer it very directly, I didn't see the Panorama on Monday night. I would ask for a report on it, but as you know, the government not only doesn't support blacklisting, but has taken action against it.
Lee.
For his recent visit to Erewash to support the historic furniture making industry, and does he agree with me that the hard-working staff he met at Duresta are best helped in these tough times by protecting their pensions and capping benefits, rather than by protecting benefits and cutting pensions as the party opposite would do?
I well remember my visit to my honourable friend's constituency, and she's absolutely right. What people want to know in this country is that we're going to cap welfare and get on top of welfare bills, but protect pensioners who've worked hard all their lives, who've saved for their retirement. And I've done a little bit of due diligence on the party opposite's policy, because last week, of course, they announced they wanted a welfare cap, and I thought, that's interesting, that's progress, but when you look at it, would they cap the welfare bill for those in work? No, they wouldn't. Would they cap housing benefit? No, they wouldn't. The one thing they want to cap, apparently, is pensions. So there we have it. Protect welfare, punish hard workers, and target pensioners. More of the same something-for-nothing culture that got this country into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, today's fall in unemployment of 5,000 is welcome. But can the Prime Minister explain why today's figures also show that 3 years into his government, living standards are continuing to fall?
Well, first of all, I think it is worth actually announcing to the House what the unemployment figures today show, because they show employment, the number of people in work in our country, going up, they show unemployment going down, and they show that, I know the party opposite don't want to hear good news, but I think it's important we hear it. And the claimant count, the number of people claiming unemployment benefit, has fallen for the 7th month in a row. I think what also is interesting is over the last year, while we've lost 100,000 jobs in the public sector, we've gained 5 times that amount in private sector employment. The figures do show some increase in wages, but obviously real wages have been under huge pressure ever since the calamitous boom and bust on which he presided. But what is good for people is that under this government, we're cutting their income tax this year.
Mr. Speaker, he's into his 4th year as Prime Minister, and his excuse for falling living standards is, don't blame me, I'm only the Prime Minister. It's simply not good enough. And he doesn't understand that because of his failure to get growth in the economy, wages are falling for ordinary people. He wants to tell them they're better off, but actually they're worse off. Can he confirm that today's figures show that after inflation, since he came to power, people's wages have fallen on average by over £1,300 a year?
Well, you might have noticed the figures announced by the Institute for Fiscal Studies are from 2008, when he was sitting in the cabinet. And it is worth remembering, while he was Energy Secretary sitting in that cabinet, the economy got smaller. It shrank month after month after month. Under this government, we see over 1.25 million more private sector jobs, a good growth in private sector employment this year. That is what's happening. Of course, living standards are under pressure, and that is why we are freezing a council tax. The Shadow Chancellor is shouting away, as ever. Perhaps
excessive noise in the chamber. Members must not shout at the Prime Minister any more than anyone should shout at the Leader of the Opposition. Let the answers be heard. The Prime Minister.
The answer is there are 1.25 million more private sector jobs under this government, and that's a good record.
Mr. Speaker, no answer from this Prime Minister on the living standards crisis that is facing families up and down the country. And you know, it's no wonder what his side are saying about him. This is what the Honourable Member for Leicestershire North West wrote about him at the weekend. He said, I know they don't want to hear it, Mr. Speaker, it's like being in an aeroplane, he said. The pilot doesn't know how to land it. We can either do something about it or sit back, watch the in-flight movies and wait for the inevitable. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't have put it better myself about this Prime Minister. The reality is this, day in, day out, what people see, calm down, just calm down. Day in, the Crimson Tide is back. Day in, day out. What people see is prices rising, wages falling, while the Prime Minister tells them they're better off. He claims the economy is healing, but for ordinary families, life is getting harder. They're worse off under the Tories.
Only someone who wants to talk down our economy could pick a day like today. More people in work, unemployment down, youth unemployment down, the claimant count down. Not one word of respect for that good agenda on jobs. Now he talks about aeroplanes. the former Home Secretary, the Honourable Member for Sheffield Brightside, never mind getting on aeroplanes, this is what he said about the Right Honourable Gentleman's leadership. He said this: "We are literally going nowhere." He hasn't even got on the aeroplane because he hasn't got a clue.
Mark Pritchard.
Last December, the whole of Shropshire welcomed the government support for a new direct rail link from Shropshire to London. However, this week, Network Rail have blocked Virgin's bid. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that Network Rail should not get in the way of the will of Shropshire people, or indeed in the way of economic progress?
Well, we want to see more direct rail links like the one of which he speaks, and there's also the need for better links to Lancashire and indeed to Blackpool. One of the issues that the rail industry is battling with is the shortage of capacity, and one of the things that HS2 will help bring is that freeing up of capacity to make more of these direct links possible. And I was discussing this yesterday with the Transport Secretary, and we should be making some progress.
Seema Malhotra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister couldn't confirm that taxpayers would not subsidise foreign buyers of property in the UK. Perhaps he can instead clarify whether his Help to Buy scheme will see taxpayers help fund purchases of second homes and holiday cottages.
Well, let me try and give the honourable lady some satisfaction. First of all, this scheme is for people's only home. It will have a mechanism in place to make sure that is the case. The second thing is, of course, the second thing which is important is, in order to take part in this scheme, you have to have a credit record, and you have to have a credit record in this country. So no, it won't do what she says it would.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, as a former pensions manager, I was proud that this government introduced a new triple lock formula.
Order, this is very discourteous. The Honourable Gentleman should be treated like every member with courtesy. Let's hear what the Honourable Gentleman has to say. Mr. Graham.
Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former pensions manager, I was proud when this government introduced a new triple lock formula on our state pension that increased by £234 in its first year to every pensioner in the land. But does the Prime Minister share my concern that under the Shadow Chancellor's plans to cut or cap pensions, all our pensioners will lose that increase and their standard of living fall sharply?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. What we've done under this government is put a cap on welfare that families can receive, but have been as generous as we can with pensioners who've worked hard during their lives, who want to have dignity and security in old age. And that's why we have the triple lock. And very interesting, because we now know that the party opposite want to cut the pension because they're putting a cap on pensions but not on welfare. Just this morning, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, he may not know this because he might not have been following this, the Shadow Foreign Secretary was on television this morning, challenged about the triple lock, and said it was their policy at present. Now, at present, given all the U-turns we've had in the last week for the party opposite, I don't think at present will last very long.
Crosby, we've got a few of you.
Will the Prime Minister congratulate Bolton Wanderers Football Club for doing the right thing by rejecting sponsorship from a payday loan firm? And will he also join in and do the right thing and give local authorities the power to ban these predatory loan sharks from our tide streams?
Well, I hear absolutely what he says, and I wish Bolton Wanderers well for the future. What I would say we need to do is give more support to credit unions in our country, because I think that is one of the best ways of addressing this whole problem of payday loans and payday lending. And I also hope that he will welcome the fact that over the last year, actually, unemployment has fallen fastest in the northwest of our country.
Dr. Julian Happert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Carers Week. Will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to...
Order! If the session has to be extended to accommodate the democratic rights of members, it will be extended. The Honourable Gentleman will, I repeat, will be heard. Dr. Huppert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is National Carers Week. So will the Prime Minister join me in paying tribute to the huge commitment that thousands of carers make day in, day out, caring for ill, frail and disabled family members, friends and partners, often unrecognised without financial assistance? Or will he sign up to the Carers Week recommendations, prepared to care?
No, I think actually on this one I can say that the honourable member speaks for the whole House and indeed the whole country in praising Britain's carers. They do an amazing job, and if they stopped caring, the cost to the taxpayer would be phenomenal. So we should do what we can to support our carers and to make sure that they get the proper respite breaks, the breaks from caring that they need to go on doing the wonderful work they do.
Mr. Graham Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why has the numbers of supply teachers in secondary schools in the last year increased by a staggering 17%?
Well, I don't have the figures for that, but what I would say is that we have protected the amount of money that goes into schools per pupil so that schools do have the money to employ the teachers that they need.
Mary McLeod.
Since 2010, unemployment in Brentford and Isleworth has fallen by 6.9%. And youth unemployment has fallen by 19%. And I will do my part as an organiser my jobs and apprenticeships fair recently in Isleworth. But does this not show that our economic plan is working?
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. We see today a growth in employment, a fall in the claimant count, a fall in youth unemployment, and most important of all, as I said, yes, we're losing jobs in the public sector because we had to make cuts to the public sector, but while we lost over 100,000 jobs in the public sector over the last year, we've gained 5 times as many as that in the private sector. Now, the Shadow Chancellor, as ever, wants to give a running commentary. Let me just remind the House what he said, because I think this is one of the most important quotations in the last 10 years of British politics. Do I think the last Labour government was profligate, spent too much, had too much national debt? No, I don't think there's any evidence for that. That phrase is going to be hung around his neck forever.
Chris Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 500 homes in my constituency were flooded in November. Residents in my constituency are terrified that their homes and businesses are now worthless because this government has failed to replace the flood insurance scheme. It's also cut over £200 million from flood defence works. Why has this Prime Minister sold my constituency down the river?
Well, I can give the honourable gentleman some quite welcome news, which is we had to extend the period of the scheme so we could continue negotiations, but I am confident that we will put in place a proper successor to that scheme, and an announcement will be made quite soon.
Annette Brooke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mud Moss makes lava lamps in my constituency. They've been making them for 50 years. They export very large exports to Germany. They've run into a problem with the reclassification of the product, and I wonder if I could send all the information to the Prime Minister and enlist his support for this very innovative company operating so well within our country.
I'm very happy to receive the information from my honourable friend. It is important we get Britain exports up. If we move from 1 in 5 of our SMEs exporting to 1 in 4, that would wipe out our trade deficit altogether. So I'm very happy to get my office to look at the information she has.
Virendra Sharma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A&E at Ealing Hospital is one of 4 he is closing in northwest London. I welcome the Health Secretary's review, but with waiting time a 9-year high, ambulances being diverted and the risk of unnecessary deaths, will he acknowledge that these closures are not a serious option if the NHS is safe in his hands?
Well, the point I make is that, as he knows, the Health Secretary has asked the IRP to conduct a full review of the proposals. The panel will submit its advice to him no later than mid-September. But let's be absolutely clear, whatever decision is reached, these proposals are not due to lack of central government funding, because North West London will receive £3.6 billion this year. That is £100 million more than the year before. And of course, if we'd listened to the Labour Party, who said that more NHS spending was, and I quote, irresponsible, then his hospitals would be having £100 million less.
Mr. Richard Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the China-Britain Business Council under its inspirational Vice Chairman, Mr. Peter Beattie, for organising a seminar which more than 60 businesses in Watford attended last Friday about exporting to China, and I think they should be congratulated on this initiative.
I'm very happy to extend my praises to the China Business Council. If we look at the evidence over the last few years, there's a really now significant increase of British exports to China and, of course, a big increase of Chinese direct investment into the UK. All of this is welcome and we need to see it grow even further.
Jim Dowd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister confirm that he understands the importance of the creative industries to the economy of this country and that they need to be buttressed by adequate intellectual property rights? But is he also aware that his intellectual property minister, that tawny-handed son of toil, the 5th Viscount Younger of Lecky, the fifth Viscount Younger of Lecky, recently told the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee in relation to Google that I am very aware of their power. I am also very aware that they have access, for whatever reason, to higher levels at number 10 than do I. Is that not a disgraceful comment?
The honourable gentleman's question, which refers to a distinguished constituent of mine, suffered from the disadvantage of being too long. The Prime Minister.
First of all, I agree with them that our creative industries are incredibly important for Britain's future. If we take one of them, the music industry, it has had an absolutely record year in terms of sales. 1 in every 4 albums sold in Europe is made here in the UK, and it's something we can be very proud of. Now, we do have to get the intellectual property regime right. That is why we are legislating. We've already taken action to extend the life of copyright protection to 75 years, which has been welcomed right across the music industry, and I simply don't accept what he says about my ministers. Indeed, the minister most responsible for this is the honourable member for Wantage, who I think actually his father was ennobled by Harold Wilson, so that doesn't really fit.
Cheryl Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join me in praising the hard work of the honourable member for South Holland and the Deepings and the local government secretary for ensuring that planning decisions taken at local level concerning wind turbines remain local? However, many of my constituents in South East Cornwall are becoming increasingly concerned that our green fields are becoming solar fields. Should decisions regarding solar fields be subjected to the same planning rules as wind turbines?
Well, first of all, I absolutely join her in praising the excellent work done by the Right Honourable Member for South Holland and the Deepings, carried on by the Minister in Biz, the Honourable Member for Sevenoaks. I think they've both done a very good job at bringing some sanity to the situation with onshore wind. On the issue of solar panels, of course, this government did substantially reduce the feed-in tariffs to make sure that this industry was not over-subsidised, because all these subsidies end up on consumers' bills, and we should think very carefully about that. Ms. Kendall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Glenfield Hospital has the second best survival rates from children's heart surgery in the country.
Absolutely.
Will the Prime Minister ensure the quality of care, including survival rates, which is what matters most to parents, is central to any decision about the future of these services?
No, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. My Right Honourable friend, the Health Secretary, will be making an announcement shortly about the issues of safe and secure and children's heart operations. Look, I think we have to be frank with people that we can't expect really technical surgery, like children's heart operations, to be carried out at every hospital in the country. As the parent of a desperately ill child, wanting to get the best care for that child, you need to know that you're getting something that's world best for really technical operations. You can't have that everywhere, but clearly the conclusion is that this process started in 2008, hasn't been carried out properly, so we need to make a restart.
Henry Bellingham.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that last year Britain became a net exporter of cars for the first time since 1976. Furthermore, if this trend continues, the UK will produce an all-time record of 2 million cars in 2017. Is this not a really good example of a high added value sector upskilling and putting the great back into British manufacturing and exports?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This is a good example of a British industry that is succeeding. If you look at Honda, if you look at Nissan, if you look at Toyota, if you look at Jaguar Land Rover, there is really good news in our automotive sector. What we now need to do is make sure we get behind that sector and encourage them to have as much of their supply chain onshore as possible. That is beginning to happen in these industries, and I'm hoping for further progress in the months ahead.
Catherine McKinnell.
This week, Newcastle City Council revealed that rent arrears have increased by over £550,000 since the bedroom tax was introduced in April. 60% of affected households are falling into arrears. When is the Prime Minister going to admit that this devastating policy risks costing more than it saves?
We ended the spare room subsidy because we don't think it's fair to give a subsidy to people in council houses that don't have it in private rented accommodation. But I have to say, there is now a question for the Labour Party. Now, if they're going to have this welfare cap, can they now tell us, are they going to reverse this change? Are you? Are you? Shaking their head. Is that no? Is that a no? So that's right. After all the talk of the last few weeks, the iron discipline we were going to hear about, the welfare cap they were telling about, test one, failure.
Thank you, Speaker. Tax avoidance is rightly at the heart of the G8 agenda. Could my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, tell the House what advice he might have received on this issue from either the leader of the Labour Party or the international pizza and expensive curry-loving Shadow Chancellor?
Well, my honourable friend makes a good point, because it's this government that is putting aggressive tax avoidance at the heart of the G8 agenda. And what do we hear this week from the Labour Party? They give tax avoidance advice to their donors. That is what they've been doing. £700,000 of tax avoided because of what Labour advised their donor to do. He asked me to calm down. Frankly, I can't calm down, because this is money that ought to be going into our health service. It ought to be going into education. It ought to be going into training young people. So let me challenge them. Will you give the money back? Yes or no? Will you? It's very simple. It's very simple. This is what the Labour leader said in The Guardian, so it must be true. 2nd of April, tax avoidance is a terrible thing. He said this: if everyone approaches their tax affairs as some of these companies have approached their tax affairs, we wouldn't have a health service. We wouldn't have an education system. That is the shameful state of the Labour Party today.
Unpaid carers across the country and invest £1.2 billion from last year's NHS underspend into social care, as we have pledged we would do, so averting the government-made crisis in A&E and social care.
Well, we could start with the money from Labour's tax avoiding. That's money that should be going into the care system. That's money that should be going into the National Health Service. This government has put £12.7 billion extra into our NHS. That's how we're supporting carers. That's how we're supporting hospitals. But she can have a word with the Shadow Chancellor and with her leader and say, pay the taxes you owe.
Bruce. Mr. Speaker, as we approach the 25th anniversary of the Piper Alpha disaster, will the Prime Minister join with me in recognising the challenges we face in continuing to bring oil and gas ashore from the North Sea, the skills and dedication of those who do it, and the paramount importance of safety in ensuring that we can continue to exploit these resources?
I certainly join my honourable friend in praising the North Sea oil and gas industry. It is a real jewel in the crown of the United Kingdom economy. I think what's encouraging is that this year we're seeing a growth in production as a number of new fields and projects come on stream, but he's absolutely right to say that at all times safety and security are absolutely paramount.
Order.